Hey everybody, welcome to the video. So we're going over the 11-game MLB DFS slate for today on Draftkings. It's also the final MLB regular season DFS slate that I'll be covering because I do not cover baseball on Sundays, and I'm also not sure if I'm going to be doing anything for the playoffs. So if this is the final video of the year, I do appreciate each and every single one of you guys watching. I appreciate the new subscribers and also appreciate the returning subscribers that I have from last season. So it was a fun year. It was a very abbreviated, short season, but it was still fun nonetheless, and I am looking forward to next year when we have a full 160 plus games to look forward to. But before we continue, as always, if you guys could just leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, consider hitting that subscribe button. It really helps me out. I really do appreciate that. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm at ChrisPenal16, CPen16 over on IG. And if you want some more content over on Patreon, don't do it for baseball. The season's pretty much over. But if you're interested in the NFL or NASCAR content, we still got quite a time left in those sports. So if you're interested, links down below for that. You can hop into the Discord and you get access to all my spreadsheets and extra content that I post if you're interested. But if not, that's fine. Let's just dive into today's slate. And today's slate, it's a little bit tricky because some teams have nothing to play for, so I could see them resting some starters, which I have no idea if they're going to be doing that yet, so it's kind of a guessing game, and you're pretty much going to have to wait until lineups come out to build your lineups, which that's not going to happen until like around 5 o'clock for a lot of teams, or even 6, so it was kind of hard to make a video. That's kind of why it's coming out late, because I was like, do I even want to do a video today? I'm not sure who's going to be starting. So the assumption is everybody I have listed here is going to, I'm just assuming all these starters start. I know that's not going to be the case. I feel like some guys are going to be sitting. I think the Astros have a good shot of sitting some guys, which I really didn't list any Astros because of that reason. If they happen to start today, all the starters, I think they're in a pretty good spot versus Kyle Gibson, but I have no idea. So let's just assume the guys I have on the list are starting as of right now, but it could totally change. But let's start with pitchers. Up top, we have Luis Castillo at 9,800. He has been on fire the past 4 starts. And looking at his game log, 30, 37, 33, 24. The strikeouts have been at 8, 6, 10, 9. And pitch count's never an issue with Castillo. And I wouldn't say this matchup versus Minnesota is great, but given the pitching options we have on the slate, Castillo would be my favorite spend-up option, just raw talent-wise. Anyway, 7 strikeouts over in Vegas, less than a 4 implied team total for the Twins. Strong numbers on the season, 31% K rate, a 2.82 xFIP, not giving up much hard contact, only 0.68 home runs per 9 innings. Yeah, so I think Castillo's fine here. Now the Twins, they do strike out quite a bit versus Reyes, with a 25.5% K rate, 191 ISO, 239 batting average, 100 WRC plus, 321 WOBA. Not my favorite numbers to go up against, but I think Castillo's going to be fine. He's a very talented pitcher. Zach Wheeler, 8,800. So this is one of the games that actually matters for the Phillies. So I could see Zach Wheeler, pitching pretty deep into this game, and if he's pitching well, they're going to keep him in. And he tends to have some pretty solid games. Now, he's not a big strikeout guy in the slightest. He's got an 18% strikeout rate on the season, which, sucks for DFS purposes. But given the circumstances here and the Phillies needing to win this game, I think he's a pretty solid play here. And you could definitely make a case for him in cash games today. He's one of the best pitching options. And the Tampa Bay Rays are a team that are striking out quite a bit. So even though he's not a big strikeout guy, he limits the hard contact. He gets a lot of ground balls, only 0.42 home runs per 9 innings, a 3.79 xFIP. And the Rays, they strike out quite a bit versus lefties, and they're still at 23% to righties. And still overall, this is a pretty solid matchup here for Zach Wheeler. So I think he's a pretty solid pitching option on this slate. Then Brandon Woodruff at 8,700. He's got ace-level stuff. Another guy that's got over a 30% K rate right there with Luis Castillo. xFIP at 3.4, which is right on par with his ERA. 6% walk rate. Pretty high ground ball rate, 1.23 home runs per 9 innings, which is the highest of all 3 of these pitchers, but only a 29% hard contact rate, and overall some pretty solid numbers for Brandon Woodruff. If I pull up his game log, I believe he's coming off a pretty strong outing. Yeah, versus Cincy, where he struck out 9 on 100 pitches, had 23.2 fantasy points. Did give up 2 runs and 1 homer, but it's still a solid start. Now, 2 starts ago, he actually played against the Cardinals. Only scored 18.1 fantasy points, had 5 strikeouts on 88 pitches. Not the best start in the world, but still, I think Woodruff's fine given the slate where there's some uncertainties. We know Brandon Woodruff's going to go, his regular workload here. And he certainly has some strikeout upside. Now, Aaron Savali, if there was no pitch count, he'd be my favorite pitching option on the slate going up against the Pittsburgh Pirates. But they said he's on an uncertain pitch count, which means I just can't play him because does that mean he's going to go 40 pitches? Does that mean he's going to go 80 pitches? I have absolutely no idea. The Indians did lock a playoff spot, and I believe they said he's going to be going out of the bullpen a bit. So they're going to have him rested for some relief outings in the playoffs. So can't really go with him. So these are the 3 guys that I feel probably the most comfortable with right now. Brandon Woodruff, Zach Wheeler, and Luis Castillo. And we'll move on to the bats. And again, guys, it's going to be a little bit of a confusing slate here. So you're going to have to wait until lineups come out so you can actually know who's actually starting today. But as of right now, let's just assume all these guys are in. So Salvador Perez, 5,200 going against Matthew Boyd. I think the Royals are one of the stronger stacks on this slate. Now, Matthew Boyd's a tricky pitcher because he's got good stuff and he can strike out some guys and he has some good starts, but he also has some starts where he gets banged up quite a bit as well. I remember to start the season, the guy was just struggling massively. He was getting up like 7 runs each and every single start. But Perez, he's been very good versus lefties this season with a 400 ISO over a 400 WOBA, 300 batting average. And Matthew Boyd is the guy that's going to give up power to righties with over a 200 ISO and over a 400 WOBA. So I definitely like some of the righties here on the Royals. Travis d'Arnaud at 4,800 going up against Tanner Houck. Is that his name? Houck? Houck? I think it's Houck. But anyway, if the Braves are starting their starters, I like them. But again, I have no idea. They could certainly rest some of these guys. We saw Freddy Freeman rest last night, although he did hit a home run in the, I think, of the 10th or 11th inning to walk it off. But like Travis d'Arnaud here versus righties, he's been hitting very well versus them so far this season with a 279 ISO, a 444 WOBA, 352 batting average, and just overall some very strong numbers. And assuming starters play in Atlanta, again, not sure, they're going to be one of the top stacks on the night going up against Boston. Then James Mccann, I like all the White Sox tonight quite a bit. They have the highest team total in the slate currently. I'm pretty sure there's no team total out yet for the Padres, which potentially could surpass that. But these White Sox righties are in a pretty good spot here versus John Lester. He's going to be a guy that gives up power to righties, and James McCann's got some pretty solid numbers versus lefties. A 200 ISO, 400 batting average, 515 on base percentage. Just overall some very strong numbers. So James McCann at 3,700 I think is a pretty solid play. Then you have Dalton Varsho here at 2,900. Marquez is a good pitcher that I do respect, but if you're going to use anybody versus him, I would prefer lefties, and this is also a pretty decent park for hitting as well. Only a 4.5 implied team total for the Diamondbacks, but they are pretty cheap, and Varsho leading off versus righties. He got over a 250 ISO versus them this season, almost 300. Low batting average, but I think he's fine, only 2,900, especially if he's leading off as a catcher, because most catchers usually hit in the bottom of the order, especially when they're that cheap. Then dropping out of first base, we have Freddy Freeman. If he happens to play, I'm not sure if he's going to, but he crushes right-handed pitching. Braves lineup's pretty loaded, and look, he's been one of the best bats in the entire league this season, especially in the NL. So yeah, I think Freeman would be interesting, but again, I am just not sure. But numbers versus righties this season have been elite. Near 400 batting average, near 400 ISO, over a 500 WOBA. You don't really need me to tell you guys that Freddie Freeman's a pretty good play tonight. Jose Abreu at 5,300, one of the leading candidates for AL MVP. Although personally, I think J-Ram should get it. I mean, I am an Indians fan, so I'm being biased, but Abreu's been having a pretty good season so far, and he is crushing lefties once again with a 340 ISO. Now the batting average is 277, base percentage is only 333, but he's still some strong numbers there, and I think Abreu is totally fine. I do like the White Sox stack on this slate. Edwin Encarnacion, 3,800. He's pretty old, but he's still got some power versus lefties. The other numbers aren't going to be too pretty, striking out a lot, low batting average, but a 333 ISO, 2 lefties, so I think he's fine. It's just a cheaper play for power on this White Sox stack. Then Daniel Vogelbach at 2,300 going against Adam Wainwright. Adam Wainwright's not a bad pitcher, but if anything, you're going to want lefties versus him, and he's dirt cheap, and he's got some decent power numbers versus right-handed pitching, so don't mind Vogelbach there. Then dropping down to second base, Ozzie Albies at, I think I always say his name wrong, Ozzie Albies. I always add a Z in there. Ozzie Albies at 5,200. He's been hitting righties pretty well this season. Last year he hit lefties better. This year versus righties at a smaller sample size, but he's batting 333 versus them, and near 300 ISO with 627 slugging, and overall some very strong numbers. So I think he's fine as long as the Braves are using all their starters. Ketel Marte at 3,400. He's good versus lefties and versus righties. Better versus lefties this season, but he's still cheap enough where I think he's pretty interesting because I still think he's underpriced. Marquez is a good pitcher, but this is a guy that when he came back from the injured list, he was like in the 5K range pretty much every single night. So I still think we're getting some good value on Marte. Then Nico Goodrum at 3,300. Just pretty cheap here. Now, I prefer him better versus lefties, where he's got a 310 batting average and a near 400 ISO. Those numbers fall off a cliff versus righties. But Carlos Hernandez is not the best pitcher in the world. I actually think the Detroit Tigers are a pretty interesting stack on this slate. They're dirt cheap, and they have a team total of 4.5. So I think they're fine for the value, and I certainly have some interest in Detroit. As you're going to see, I have quite a few of these bats listed, like Harold Castro, Victor Reyes, and I think a couple of, maybe another guy as well. Then Nick Madrigal at 2,700, just a cheap righty here versus John Lester. Should be near the top of the order. Numbers versus lefties this season, 211 batting average, 0 ISO, and just overall like 0 numbers whatsoever. But he's cheap, and I like righties versus John Lester. And then dropping out of third base, we have Jose Ramirez at 5,600, who's been on absolute fire for quite some time now. And J-Ram, he is a guy, he's streaky, and when he's hot, and he turns into one of the best players in baseball, and that's certainly what he's doing right now. So when he's hot, you want to ride the hot hand, especially for a guy like J-Ram. And Look, he's been hitting lefties well this season. He's been hitting righties well. He's been better versus lefties, but still good numbers versus righties. A 127 WRC plus, 235 ISO, a 261 batting average. Just overall some very strong numbers. So J-Ram is fine. I don't love the Indian stack today, but I still think they are viable. You could throw in Frankie Lindor, Reyes, and some other guys like Tyler Naquin and Cesar Hernandez and Carlos Santana, but I think they're an okay stack tonight, but they didn't really get me too excited. And they did lock up a playoff spot, so. Then Franco at 4,200 going up against lefty Matthew Boyd. He's got plenty of power versus lefties. Looking at his numbers this season, it's only at .079. But overall in his career, he has had power to lefties. And he does hit them very well. He's got over a 300 batting average versus them this season, versus the righties, and near 200 ISO this year. So he's got a little bit more power versus the righties. But overall, he can still hit lefties pretty well. Matthew Boyd is a guy that will give up power to right-handed bats. Eugenio Suarez at 3,500. He's just a bit too cheap here. Now only a 3.57 implied team total for the Reds. And they did lock up a playoff spot, so we'll see how their lineup shakes out. But assuming Suarez is in the lineup, he's got 270 ISO to righties, 482 slugging, low batting average, and does strike out quite a bit. But Pineda, he hasn't made too many starts this season, but he has had a lower strikeout rate to the righties, a better WOBA, only 300 WOBA to lefties and a 214 WOBA to righties. But Suarez is the guy that's got pop, and he's a little bit too cheap here, assuming he makes the lineup. Then Alec Bowman at 3,100. I could see him being pretty chalky here. The Rays should throw out a bunch of pitchers here. They have John Curtis as a starter, and we'll have to see how long he goes. But, Bowman, he's pretty cheap here, and he's been hitting righties very well this year. Not for a ton of power, but over a 400 on base percentage, a 348 batting average, just overall some pretty strong numbers. So I think he is totally fine at that price point. Then at shortstop is loaded. I don't have Lindor listed, but he's certainly playable as well. But Tatis going up against Johnny Cueto. He's great versus lefties. He's great versus righties. He's actually been a bit better versus the righties this season, with a near 300 batting average, near 600 slugging, and near 300 ISO. So Tatis is fine. Tim Anderson's in a good spot here versus a lefty. He's been crushing lefties this season with a near 500 batting average, 600 ISO, 333 on WRC plus. Just really, really strong numbers. I do like the White Sox stack on this slate, so I think Tim Anderson's totally fine there. Xander Bogart's 5,200. He's going up against a lefty, and Tucker Davidson. Or is it Davidson? Davidson. Okay, I got it right. He's been hitting lefties well this season. It's just there's so many good shortstops, and like I said, I don't even have Lindor listed. You could also throw in Nico Goodrum as a cheaper shortstop, but it's pretty loaded here. If you're stacking Padres, I guess Tatis. Stacking White Sox, I'd go with Tim Anderson. If you're stacking Boston today, you could go Xander Bogaerts. If you're stacking Royals, you get Alberto Mondesi. He's been hitting lefties very well this season with a 255 ISO. Only a 255 batting average, but he's been a bit better versus lefties this season compared to the righties, and I do like the Royals stack on this slate. And speaking of Royals, we're going to dip down to the outfield here. We have Whit Merrifield. He's a bit expensive, and I didn't really like any of the super expensive outfielders. Yeah, guys like Acuna and Marcell Ozuna are all viable if they happen to play today, but again, I'm just not sure who's going to be playing today, so I thought I'd go with a little bit cheaper here. But just keep in mind, I do like the Brave stack, and if all the starters are in, I say go for it. But Whit Merrifield going up against lefty in Matthew Boyd. He's always got that stolen base upside as well, and he's a nice contact hitter, only a 7% carry to the lefties this season, and near 300 batting average, so I do like Whit Merrifield in Royal stacks. I missed the days when he was second base eligible as well, though, because I always like plugging him in at second base. Feels weird just plugging him in the outfield. But JD Martinez, 4,400, going up against a lefty here. He crushes lefties in his career. So far this season, hasn't really been doing that. Below a 200 ISO, only a 79 WRC plus, and a 226 batting average. But his history versus lefties is obviously elite, and I think he's fine just for the price point. Kristen Yelich, this is the cheapest I have seen him in quite some time, probably in a couple of years. But he has struggled versus righties this season, which is weird. He's crushing lefties, doing very well versus left-handed pitching, but versus righties, a 163 ISO, 333 slugging, and 170 batting average. He's also striking out over 30% to lefties and righties this year. He is struggling big time. But he's dirt cheap, and I like lefties better versus Adam Wainwright, so I think he's viable, especially at only 4,300, but only a 3.81 implied team total for the Brewers today, which doesn't get me too excited. Then some cheaper options here in Victor Reyes. I just kind of like the Detroit stack today, which never sounds too exciting to say I like the Detroit stack, but they're in a good spot here versus Carlos Hernandez. And Victor Reyes, he's been okay versus righties this season with a 266 batting average. Last year he was hitting over 300 versus righties, but he's fine as a leadoff play. Then Harold Castro potentially hitting cleanup here, 2,400. He's got over 325 batting average to righties this season, only 100 ISO, but a near 400 on base percentage. So I think he's fine for cheap. Then Sam Hilliard, he's got some decent power here versus right-handed pitching, and Luke Weaver is a guy that's giving up over a 400 WOBA to lefties this season. And Hilliard, a near 300 ISO to righties and over a 500 slugging. So I think he's fine, but he does strike out quite a bit at 37% versus lefties and versus righties. But that's pretty much going to be it for the video, guys. I hope it was helpful. Again, it's going to be a little confusing slate, and it was kind of hard to make this video because I'm not sure who's going to be sitting or not. If the Astros are a full go, I like Springer, I like Brantley, I like Bregman, I like Altuve. But again, I just really have no idea. So hopefully this was helpful, like I said. And if it was, make sure you leave a like. And if you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button. I cover NFL almost every single day. I know there's a couple of days I don't post NFL content, but do NFL pretty much every single day. I do NASCAR each and every single weekend, and then I guess when NBA comes back around, I'll be doing that. Then I'll be doing MLB. Always in the future for main slates. In the regular season, we'll see how it goes for the playoffs, but potentially could be the last video of the season, so I do appreciate each and every single one of you guys watching, and I'll see you guys next time, whenever that is.